All right, welcome back to Beyond the Buckets. I'm happy to have Dr. Matt Dewar on the program. Welcome.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for having me. Excited to chat.
Definitely. You're an educator along with a wellness advisor, author, speaker, and your main title would be Mindfulness and Emotional Intelligence Educator. Tell me what that actually means.
It's a great question. The simplest way of explaining it is I help people develop the tools to more skillfully self-regulate, especially in a modern environment where stress is only going up.
Yeah.
And if we're not developing these tools along with these rising stress levels, it has really deleterious consequences on our well-being and also our performance.
I want to get into some of those tools, but before we do that, why don't we give a 2.5, 3 minute origin story on who you are and how you got to where you're at right now?
I will try to make a longer story shorter, but I was a kid who grew up in a home that had a lot of emotion dysregulation. By the time I was in 5th grade, I had a sibling who died. My parents were divorced, and another sibling who had addiction issues. And I really struggled with school. And the one place that I excelled and the one place where I really found a sense of identity and self-confidence was playing basketball. And I was good at it, and it gave me positive reinforcement. And I honestly don't know who I would be if I didn't have that to kind of hang my identity on growing up.
Yeah.
And so I leaned on that. I had to repeat a couple grades because my grades were so bad. I had to repeat a year in elementary school, and then I had to repeat my sophomore year of high school when I transferred to a school. A private school. And so a lot of the work that I do is driven by my own biography. It's remembering what it was like for me to try to play on teams with coaches who had emotion dysregulation issues. It's driven by just remembering being in classrooms with teachers who struggled with emotion dysregulation. And ultimately, when I did transfer schools in high school, I always say to people that it's kind of like if my life were a timeline, there would be the before and after moment, really. The central before and after moment would really be this shift in high school to a new private school where I was just surrounded by educators who are absolutely fantastic.
Wow.
And they took me from being a DF student and completely intellectually disinterested to someone who was a straight A student by the time I left and deeply interested in just questions about human experience, so on and so forth. And again, longer story short, I ended up dropping out of college a couple years later, and I lived in a Zen Buddhist monastery for 4.5 months.
Wow.
It was a dream of mine to go overseas and study meditation in an authentic setting. And so I didn't tell my parents, nothing. I literally walked out of class one day, went down to the registrar, withdrew, got on a plane and went to South Korea and lived in some monasteries and learned a lot. And then when I came back and got back into school, everything was kind of leading to the path where I'm at now.
Wow. Several directions that I could take you from there. But what I didn't know that, I obviously didn't get that on our pre-call. But
just trying to make things interesting.
Yeah, for sure. How did one of your siblings pass?
It's actually a horrible story. He had chicken pox. And back then they didn't know yet that if you gave someone aspirin, right? If a child has chicken pox, you don't give them aspirin because there's like a 1 in 100 chance that they could develop Reye's syndrome.
Is that because of the acetaminophen in the aspirin?
It might be. And,
Yeah.
and so he just happened, my mom will still cry about it to this day, where within the span of 5 days, he went from a completely healthy kid to in a coma. And then, had he lived, he would have had severe brain damage. And so it just, it just shows how fragile life is, and how within just a short amount of time, things can really change. But it obviously had a real hard ripple effect and impact on my family, my parents' marriage, et cetera.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Interesting how that can take place. My mom, she was stricken with polio. She was born in 1954. And a few years later, people, started getting vaccinated, or around that time, people started getting vaccinated. But ironically, as vaccines right now are being very, in a lot of ways, it's just different for people. Some people want to get it. Some people, think you shouldn't get it. But had my mom gotten vaccinated, she wouldn't have had polio. But that's shaped the rest of her life, and in turn it shaped my life, because my mom's leg, if you put your wrist up, it's her right leg is the size of an average person's wrist. And so, when she was 12 or 13 years old, she was diagnosed with polio, and she goes and she's told that she's never ever going to walk, and she's going to be in a wheelchair and all of these things. And she was tired of being, teased by her classmates. And she decided, no, I'm going to start with this brace, and then eventually I'm going to walk. And she's walked ever since. Now she's, in her 60s now, but she has a cane, but she gets around, and she hasn't been in a wheelchair her entire life. But that's kind of been the mantra that I've always lived my life by, is like, she's had a debilitating, a prognosis. And for me to whine or cry about any small thing that happens in my life compared to a disability, like there's no reason for me to think that way. So, yeah, it's interesting how those things kind of take place. And for your parents, especially, I can't even imagine living with that. I wouldn't even say it's guilt, but I guess it would be guilt. But it's just I couldn't even imagine.
Yeah, it to this day, it obviously will, it will forever impact them. But as you were telling your story, and I'm reflecting on mine, I think the silver lining is the ability to entertain a perspective that's really important. And that's, and to kind of connect to the things that we're going to be talking about. It's, I think a lot of stress management is perspective management. And it's stress pulls us into the moment, and we only see what's right in front of us. And if we don't have the skills to disengage and see the broader picture of our lives and what's important, very easy to just be swept away by the current of stress and anxiety. And so your mom learned that, you learned that from your mom, and I learned that from my story. And it's kind of the human journey. It's the recurring human archetypal story of just facing challenges, and then hopefully learning and becoming stronger and more resilient as a result of those things.
Definitely. You can learn by going through it, or you can learn by, having somebody else's experiences, and both can be valuable. But I tend to lean on learning by somebody else's experiences at first, so you don't, go down the wrong direction. Talk to me a little bit about your other sibling that had, was it substance abuse problems?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have 5 brothers, and I would have had 6. And so the next oldest was this brother who then developed substance issues. And it makes all the sense in the world why that the oldest child usually gets the burden of divorce and adversity and everything. And the younger children typically get the attention and the resources, and the older sibling or siblings are usually forced to have to, be wise beyond their years and take on responsibilities that maybe they're not fully ready for.
Yeah.
And no doubt that wore on him. And I often say that our worst habits are unskillful attempts to manage stress.
Yeah.
And in my brother's case, that's exactly what happened, is that alcohol became a way of surviving the present moment. And sometimes for people who are in a lot of pain, that's enough, right? If you can just survive now, that's enough. Even if the cost is inescapable, but it's displaced to a later time.
Yeah.
And this is why, obviously, addiction is a real complex and difficult issue.
Wow. And your oldest brother is the one that passed away, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So do you think that's why your parents wanted to have 5 more children?
So no, actually so my parents got divorced and my dad got remarried. And so I have half brothers. I'm the youngest. So it stopped with me with my mom, but with my dad, there were more.
Wow. Tell me what it was like studying or being a monk for 4 months. And what does that entail? Is it complete silence? You only see what you see on the movies and things like that. I haven't read up on anything like that, but yeah, tell me about it.
So this wasn't totally completely random. I had met a Zen Buddhist monk randomly at a Borders who had just come from South Korea, and he was handing out flyers for a talk. And I had just read Phil Jackson's book, Sacred Hoops, where he was talking about the influence of Zen. So this is like circa 1997. Mm-hmm. And I saw him and I'm like, are you a Zen Buddhist monk? And the only thing I knew about Zen Buddhism was literally like a month before I read Phil Jackson's book. And he was like, yes. And I'm like, I'll take one of these flyers. Like, I'm coming to the talk. So I went to the talk and he and I developed a relationship. He taught me how to meditate. We'd drink tea together. I'd go down to the center all the time my senior year of high school. I actually brought him to my school to teach meditation classes. And then at some point he gave me, I think it was after my senior year of high school, the summer after, he's like, you have an open invitation to come study at any temple in Korea. You just got to get there. And so I told my parents I wanted to take a gap year, and they're like, no. And so I ended up going to school for 1.5 years, and it was just, I just had that itch that I wanted to go, and I wanted to be in this environment. And then finally I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to wait for their permission. I'm just going to do it. And so literally one day I walked out of class and did it. So I got there and I had a very romanticized notion of what it was going to be like. Mm-hmm. I thought that it was, externally, it was everything I thought it would be. And I always say to my students when I tell them this story that I learned one of the most important lessons of my life is wherever you go, you bring your mind with you. And so I went there and it was in the mountains. There were natural water springs coming down and you could scoop out of a stream and drink it. There were temples that were 1,500 years old. Everything was beautiful, serene, calm, except me. And it was because I have this whole world inside of me and I can travel 7,000 miles to the other side of the world. Yeah. But my mind doesn't move. Right. You just bring it with you. Yeah. And so I learned the hard way that sometimes it takes a failed outward journey to really begin your inward journey. And that's where real traveling takes place, is realizing that it's the way in which you orient yourself to the world and understand who and what you are and what it is you want to do with your life. Those are the things that really need to be ironed out. And sometimes, and I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent here, but I think sometimes we can get in the habit of trying to change everything around us only to ensure that we stay the same. And I think a really important life lesson is that true change, transformation, it begins within. It's a willingness to do the change work here and not just restructuring the circumstances around you, because you're telling yourself, then you'll be better. Then you'll feel better. You'll perform better or whatever. I mean, sometimes that is the case. People really do need a shift of external circumstances. But in my case, I didn't need that. What I really needed was to more skillfully start working with my own inner emotional life.
Right. Um, while you were saying that, you think about like when you go on vacation, for instance, you're so excited to get, you're so excited to plan for it. You're so excited to, you're going to do when you get there. And then when you kind of get there, sometimes well, for me anyway, it's been kind of a letdown. And then, you know, when you come back, it feels like you need a vacation from the vacation. And the second thing that I want to touch on is you kind of just picked up and left. And you know, ask for forgiveness later. Actually, I'm reading the 4-Hour Work Week right now, and Tim Ferriss is talking about, you know, sometimes you just have to act and ask for forgiveness later. And that immediately reminded me of that point in the book where he's talking about, you know, different things where you know, he just picked up and left and you know, asked for forgiveness later, and it ends up working out in the long run. Did your parents forgive you for that?
So such an amazing question. So I withdrew and I got back to my dorm room and I called my dad and I said, Dad, I just withdrew. My dad's a sweet guy, like just super calm, nice. And he dropped more F-bombs on me in that phone call. And because he just basically paid a semester's worth of tuition for no credit. Because I left, I didn't think of any of this in my carpe diem moment where I'm like, I'm going to go do this, right? I didn't think about, oh, my dad's going to eat a semester's worth of tuition. And so he told me I could walk home, and I was in New Hampshire. And so I live in Chicago, or my family lives in Chicago. He told me I could walk home, and hung up on me. And I remember thinking, yeah, I didn't think this one out, right? The reality of it hit me. And then he called back, I don't know, sometime later. And he's like, I'm sorry. I'm just really upset. And I want you to know, I just don't agree with what you did. And I think you're being selfish. And he was right. I mean, everything he was saying was exactly what a parent should say. But he said, you know what, I'll get you home. And once you're home, that's it. It's all on you. If you're making this happen, you're making it happen. So I arranged everything, the flight. I made some money doing some odd jobs, and got on a plane and went to Korea.
Wow, unbelievable. Well, let's jump into mindfulness. The first time I've heard of mindfulness really actually is during the last 10 months. And now you're the third or fourth mindfulness instructor or educator that I've had on. It's just opened my eyes to so many different things and ways that I want to be better in my own life, and ways to decrease stress and you know, find other than the normal outlets that people may use to decompress. And so I'm really interested to find out some best practices for selfish reasons, and then obviously for the listeners as well.
Yeah. So let's start with just an operational definition of what mindfulness is, because I think I just wrote a book called the Mindful Breathing Workbook for Teens that comes out this August with New Harbinger. And when I was writing that, I did an Amazon search where I put in mindfulness and then just hit go, and I got over 30,000 results.
Wow.
Right. So mindfulness means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And so I don't want to act like I'm providing the definition of mindfulness, but I'm providing the definition that guides the work that I do with athletes and people. And it is that most folks think of mindfulness as a technique for creating relaxation. And what does that technique entail? That technique entails entering into a formal space of stillness and quiet, where you can begin to develop the capacity to observe your experience non-reactively.
So say that in not in doctor speak, but in layman's terms, because I can kind of follow it, but in I want to make sure that I really understand.
Yeah. So most folks want to do mindfulness as something to relax. And the way you do that is you go into a room that's quiet, and you get in a chair, and usually you sit upright or you lie down on the floor.
Yep.
And so you get into a place of physical stillness, and you have environmental silence. And doing this allows you then to pay attention to your experience, what's going on, your thoughts and your emotions. And usually we're so enamored by our thinking and our feeling that we just jump onto it right away. And so wherever it's going, we're going with it, which is away from the present moment. And so what we want to do is develop this balanced mind state where we can simply observe our thoughts and we can observe our emotions without immediately reacting to them. And so the question is, well, why is this an important skill in terms of emotional intelligence? Well, you can't make good decisions for yourself if you have no ability to disengage from your thinking and feeling, right? If every time you think something and feel something, you're immediately reacting, you're not going to end up in good situations. You're not going to produce good outcomes for yourself, right? You're going to be living in haste all the time.
Right.
And so what mindfulness is doing is there's that famous quote by Viktor Frankl: between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space, you can make a choice as to how you want to be. And that choice determines your freedom. I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
And so mindfulness is that space. It's opening that space so that you can more deliberately choose what you are going to do. And when we talk about this in the context of athletics, where stress is really intensified, it's developing this ability to be in that moment of stress and still have this capacity to skillfully maneuver what you're going to do. And I always talk about that the athlete who really develop the quality of mindfulness are able to experience time in slower frames. And it's because they have this ability to disengage with their attention and simply observe and watch. And when you're able to do that, everything around you is happening then seemingly more slowly rather than accelerating. That's what stress does. Stress accelerates how time unfolds. Mindfulness does the opposite. It slows things down. And when you're talking about athletes who are performing at a really elite level, just that ability to not react and to be able to have some agency in what you're going to do can be the difference between winning and losing, performing at the highest level versus, performing at just a high level.
Right. So I see that completely, and I'll some of the athletes that are actually really doing this. Jason Gant was on. He hasn't aired yet, but he'll air like a few episodes before yours. And he's a mindfulness coach and a basketball coach as well. Played at Cal Berkeley, and he's sending me this stuff on LeBron and Steph Curry, how they're using mindfulness to benefit their actual performance. Russell Wilson, he works with Trevor Moawad. Do you know who that is?
Mm-hmm. After our conversation, I didn't know who he was, and you brought him up, and so I looked him up, and now I do.
the neutral thinking, in both of these moments can success and failure live in the same moment. So in the moment of him getting ready to take the snap to either win the Super Bowl or potentially be the GOAT of the Super Bowl, it was always neutral. So if you want this one thing to happen, the other thing can possibly happen, but most importantly is being in the moment, being neutral in that moment, and whatever the result is going to be the result. And look at Tom Brady. He's entering, at this point, the game will have already been played. But if you watch him, he's so calm in so many of these high stress intensity moments. And the only way that you can get through that sort of thing is if you have coached yourself, or somebody has coached you to think about what you're thinking about when the stress level is high, and centering yourself into that, to the moment where it doesn't matter if it goes right, it doesn't matter if it goes wrong. I'm going to remain here. And because of that calm attitude, more times than not, your performance is going to be higher, because you're right here, right now, worried about only what you can control. And most of that, from what I've been researching, is in tune with your breath on what's going on right in that moment.
That's awesome. And we can get to that in 1 second, that the breath really is the primary access point for learning to control our internal state, that we can leverage our breathing to modulate our internal state. And human beings are the only thing that can do this, the only breathing being on planet Earth who can consciously take a hold of respiration patterns to impact their internal state. We'll get to that in 1 second. I want to comment on what you just said, because it's really important, is that playing athletics, well, life is stressful, and playing sports at a high level is even more stressful. It's deliberately putting yourself into high stress moments. Mm-hmm. And what athletes often don't understand is that there's a difference between stress that's just a part of the game and what I call meta stress, stress about stress.
Okay. Yeah.
And so meta stress is not something that has to be there. It's something that's added on, and it's added on because you lack internal skills. It's emotional reactivity is what it is. It's you getting caught in your own internal state. And as a result, it pulls your attention away from task and into state. And when we talk about high performance, like if I were to say to you, Chris, in your basketball career, describe the moments where you were playing at your best. What were you thinking and feeling? And whenever I ask athletes this, they're like, I don't even know.
Nothing.
Your internal state becomes transparent to the task. And so mindfulness is the ability to make it more likely that that will become your default setting while performing, because you're not reacting habitually to every thought and feeling that's going on as the drama of competition unfolds. You know, the team has a big play or somebody does something, and now you're thinking, oh gosh, there's only this much time on the clock. And suddenly now your mind is playing pinball with all these things you don't have control over. And so
let me ask you this while you continue, while I still have it on my mind. One would say that, okay, if you were a neutral thinker, or you were, practicing mindfulness, and something good happens, can you get excited about that good event that actually happened? Or because of your excitement, will you not actually be mindful about what actually took place, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So this has come up a lot when I was working with a college football team, and there's no right or wrong answer to this, right? Because everyone has a different relationship with their internal states, and everyone has a different emotional thermostat of what's normal, right? So it's hard to make sweeping recommendations, but in general, I recommend to athletes, if it's spontaneous, like the same way when I said, when you're performing at your best, what's your internal state? You're like, I don't even know. I'm just riding the moment. I'm just being what I am in that moment and performing it in that way. If in the course of a competition, joy or something spontaneously emerges, then just let it be what it is. Don't manufacture it. Don't belabor it. Just let it be what it is. And when it's like a wave, when it comes up, cool. And then when it's gone, and you're on to task. Don't hold on to it. Don't make it into something it's not, because what ends up happening, and I've seen this repeatedly, is it creates a crash. It creates an adrenaline dump. there's a big play and people jump onto it and they get so amped up, and then there's this kind of like adrenaline dump on the backside of it.
Yeah.
And so, embrace it if that wave of positive emotion comes over your team because you just made a big play, but don't necessarily become attached to it and invest energy where you're not going to be getting a return on it.
So I watched the recent Tiger Woods documentary on HBO Max. Have you seen it yet?
No.
It's actually really good. The one critique that I would have is that it's a documentary about Tiger. It's not a documentary that Tiger promoted. So it's only one side of the story, but there's a very telling piece in part one where Tiger hits this amazing shot, and like he's super dialed in, and then as soon as he hits it, he kind of like gives a smile, and then all of a sudden, like, he caught himself and he was like, no, I need to go back into Tiger mode. And I was just like, whoa, it gave me chills the way I saw it. I showed my wife, I was like, did you just see what he just did there? He was in the moment because he shot a good shot, and then all of a sudden back to that mode. And it's really interesting because at the very end of it, Tiger was so before all the things that happened, and they go over all of that in greater detail, probably too much because I really just like the performance side of the things. But at the end, they showed him, fraternizing more with his competitors, now that he has kind of gone through the trials and tribulations of, his career. And now in the later stage of his career, he is now fraternizing, but he would have never fraternized, in the early 2000s when he was, making his run, to 18 or 19, majors. He now has changed and being more in the moment, and now it's saying, hey, I can loosen up a little bit because that's what that moment calls for. But when I'm on the tee, now this moment calls for me to be locked in and dialed in. I think it is a very interesting piece to what you're saying right now is, be free in whatever moment it is. And then you got to move on. Okay, now it's next. The next play, or the next task, like you mentioned. So I think it was very interesting, and I firmly agree with you.
I think sometimes I draw out a model when I'm working with athletes where the ideal progression is identity drives behavior, which drives feelings. Okay. What ends up happening in an untrained athlete is feelings drive behavior, which drives identity. And so if you tether yourself to what you're feeling in every moment as an athlete, feelings are unpredictable. They're all over the place. They don't make sense, right? They're just they're an internal status report that your physiology is sending in real time based on perceived threat, etc., opportunity. And so if you are dictating your behavior to the ebbs and flows of what you feel, what's your performance going to be?
Right.
Inconsistent. It's going to be all over the place because it's like shooting a cannon from a canoe. there's no support. There's no foundation. But if you dial into this idea of identity, of someone who is in the present moment, of someone who is practicing non-judgmental awareness, and that ultimately guides decisions and behaviors, then ultimately then the feelings will follow suit. And you'll know what to do with them, and you'll know how to manage them in the moment, like what you just described with Tiger. It just shows the maturity, the progression of understanding over time how to interact with your internal state.
Yeah.
Now, you can get to someone like at a really, really, really high level, like Kobe or Jordan, where they're so good at managing their own internal state that they're going to deliberately do things to dysregulate you and they know it won't dysregulate them. They're going to talk trash. They're going to do all sorts of things that will knock you off and create emotional reactivity in you, but they have full command over their state. And that's like a whole nother level of psychological warfare in sports.
Wow. Do you want to dive into the breath now?
Sure. Yeah. So, where do you want me to start?
Wherever you want. I'm just trying to learn every single day. So you're the expert.
So let's create a context for breath, and let's say that context is emotional intelligence. And what's emotional intelligence? It involves two skills: self-awareness and self-regulation. What does that mean, right? It's doctor speak. What does it mean in layman's terms? Self-awareness is the ability in real time to understand what you are feeling and what has caused it. Okay.
So let me, that reminds me of, I believe it's Tim Kite, but E plus R equals O. So the event takes place, and then your response, and then that's going to be based on what the outcome is. So your response is based on, whatever the event was. And that's why he talks about E plus R equals O. And I think that's pretty much what you're talking about, of how this you feel.
Yeah. I think the easiest way to describe it is if I were to say, Chris, right now, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being you are crawling out of your skin with anxiety, and 1 being you are so relaxed, you're about to fall asleep. Where's your internal state?
Probably at a 3 right now.
A 3.
Yep.
And so on what basis are you making that assessment? How does Chris know Chris is at a 3?
Based on what is taking place right now, I guess would be the event.
Okay. But when you make the assessment and you say my state right now is about a 3, what information are you using to determine that you're at a 3? This is the part people.
So you said, I would a 1 would be getting ready to go to sleep. I'm definitely not ready to go to sleep. I'm not, laying down or anything. I'm not tired physically. And, I'm definitely not anxious. I'm having a good conversation, so I'm not anxious at all. And so I would say, I'm not on the higher scale. So anything 5 and above, there's no anxiety. And I would probably say I'm not ready to go to sleep, 1 or a 2. So I'm probably a 3 because I'm super comfortable right now in the space that I'm at this moment in time.
Yeah. And so ultimately you're determining what everything you just said is right on. Mm-hmm. But beneath that is an awareness of your body.
Yep.
You're right now, you're saying I'm at a 3 because there are sensations in your body that you are unconsciously perceiving that allow you to be like, I'm at a 3. And so mindfulness is a way of saying, what are those sensations?
Yeah.
What's actually telling you in your body that you're at a 3 or a 7 or an 8? And that's self-awareness, right? And so getting to the breathing in a second, because this will connect to the breathing, self-awareness is the ability to recognize what's my internal state in real time. Where do I fall on that continuum of alertness and calm? Right? 10 is hyper alertness. 1 is hypo alertness or calm, relaxation. Okay. Right. So once you know I'm at a 3, self-awareness is what conditions have contributed to that. So you can start to realize that your internal state manifests as a result of different things that are going on in your environment and different things that are going on within yourself. So if you're like, well, I didn't, let's say someone I work with students who have high anxiety all the time. And so they'll come in and I'll say, okay, where are you at? I'm at a 9. Okay, well, why are you at a 9? Well, I drank caffeine kickstart for lunch, right? I'm gonna be like, well, we talked about that, right? Bunch of caffeine doesn't help your anxiety. What else have you been doing? And they'll go through and they'll start identifying contributing factors to that state. So self-awareness is knowing where am I at and what factors have contributed to that. Then the second part of emotional intelligence is self-regulation. Once you realize what state you're in and why you're there, how are you going to shift your state to where you need to be, right? Based on what your environment is asking. Like right now, you're at home and it's a Friday evening. A 3 is totally appropriate.
Yeah.
But if you were at a 3 right before coaching a basketball game, what tools would you have to shift your state, right? Or if you were at a 9 right before you're about to take a calculus exam and you're a student, what tools do you have to bring your state down? And this is where breathing comes in. Is that 3 years ago, the Krasnow lab at Stanford and Jack Feldman, who's a breathing guru, neurobiologist at UCLA, their 2 labs got together and they identified the neurons in the brain that link emotion and breathing in the brain. And so what this means is that every moment, your emotional state is reflected in your breathing pattern, right? And so part of when you said, I'm at a 3, a part of that awareness was an awareness of your breathing. So an awareness of how you're breathing in real time is a tool for realizing what your internal state is. So if we're tense, is this making sense?
It is, yeah,
okay, for
sure.
So if we're going up that continuum to like an 8 or a 9, your breathing is going to be tight. It's going to be shallow. It's going to be heavy. And often people start unconsciously breathing through their mouth when they're stressed out. And that poses all sorts of issues because you're offloading a ton of carbon dioxide, which can kick up anxiety even more. But just having that awareness of what are my breathing patterns telling me right now about how stressed out I am. And then once you realize where you're at, you can shift your breathing pattern to change your emotional state. So breathing is a bridge between self-awareness and self-regulation. And the reason why it's such an invaluable tool and why it's the first tool I use with athletes, students, corporate executives, anyone who wants to learn on stress management, is there's very low barrier to entry, meaning your breathing is always accessible. Right. Are you ever at a distance from your breath? Right?
No, deep waters.
So wherever you go, your breathing is there with you, and you're breathing 20 to 30,000 times today and 600 million times over the course of a normal lifespan. And so each one of those breaths is an opportunity to consciously take a hold of your nervous system in real time. And so we can talk about different breathing cadences and techniques if you want to lower stress. So because most people find that the big issue for them in terms of emotion regulation is that they're too high, they're too anxious and stressed out, and they want to come down.
Right.
That seems to be 90% of the population. Very few people want to use breathing techniques to bring themselves from low to high, which you can do. Are you familiar with Wim Hof?
No, I'm not.
Wim Hof is he's a breathing guru who has super ventilation exercises where you do rapid breathing through the mouth for like 20 to 30 reps. And then after you let your exhalation out, let's say on the 20th rep, then you hit a stopwatch and you time a breath hold. Okay. And then you hold your breath for an exceptional amount of time because you just increase this level of oxygen into your body. And then you eventually end, and then you do 2 or 3 more sets of that. And so I did his breathing, his breath training program and everything. So I was doing his stuff for like 6 or 7 months. And I got up to where I was holding my breath for about 3 minutes and 40-ish seconds.
Wow.
Right? And for the rest of the day, I would do it in the morning. I'm very sensitive to caffeine. I don't like caffeine. I don't drink it in the morning. When I was doing these breathing techniques, I was crawling out of my skin. It was as if I like drank 2 Red Bulls.
Wow.
So respiration you can use it to calm down, but you also can use techniques to bring yourself up. So I'm happy to talk about techniques if you want, or any direction you want to go.
Yeah, I've done some breath work actually on the show. So I didn't even know we were going to do it, but we started doing a meditation with Jason, and then Todd talked about, I think you know Todd too. He talked about 16 seconds to something. I forget what it's called, but you basically exhale for 4. You're going to inhale for 4, you're going to hold for 4, and then exhale again. So 16 seconds of, I forgot what he said, but it's interesting.
Box breathing.
Yeah. And then Blaine Strong, he's a avid workout guy and super fit, but he says when he runs, he only breathes in and out through his nose. And people wonder, well, you know, he's not even sweating. And it's because he thinks that his breath through his nose and in and out of his nose, and not, you know, using the extra carbon dioxide, like you mentioned, helps him recover faster. I don't know if that's true or not.
It is true that when you breathe through your nose, we're designed to breathe through our noses, with the exception of when we're eating, talking, and doing like the highest intensity exercise. Other than that, we're actually designed to breathe through our noses, and it's for many reasons, but one is it regulates the balance between carbon dioxide and oxygen, which allows us to be way more aerobically efficient. And that's why someone can run like you were just describing, and he's not sweating, because his body's working very efficiently at that pace, because the CO2 levels are regulated. When you open your mouth, all of a sudden you just start dumping CO2. I mean, you can just hold your hand in front of your mouth and breathe out your mouth, and you feel that level of air coming out, right? Now close your mouth and breathe through your nose and do the same thing. It's much less coming out. And so the nose is designed to regulate that. In science, if you remember from high school, they talked about the Bohr effect. And the Bohr effect is the affinity of oxygen and hemoglobin in the presence of carbon dioxide in your bloodstream. And so when you breathe through your nose, you're increasing CO2 levels so that you can use oxygen more efficiently.
Well, yeah, why don't you give us one breath technique, maybe to calm or center?
So, yeah, I'll say this before we do this. There's an old saying, the methods are many, the principles are few. There are so many breathing techniques, okay? They're all great, but the way I like to enter into it is talking about principles, because if you understand the principles, you can employ any technique you want. And so in let's say like computer programming, it's all about ones and zeros. It's the basic binary of all computer programming. It's just programming in ones and zeros and different variations, and that creates all computer programming. Well, with breathing and internal state, it's the same thing. It's inhalation and exhalation. Those are your two dials, okay? Any breathing technique where you're emphasizing inhalation, you're turning the dial of your state up. You're going up to 10, right? Any breathing technique that emphasizes exhalations is turning the dial of your internal state down. Just understanding that principle, you can do so much, right? You can find any breathing pattern or technique that works for you, because ultimately it's that simple. It's just manipulating those two things. Inhale up, exhale down. Correct. Because when you inhale, you're engaging your sympathetic nervous system. When you exhale, you're suspending. It's actually not activating the parasympathetic nervous system. It's just deactivating the sympathetic. Okay. A lot of people confuse that. They think because there is a calming effect, it's actually just deactivating the sympathetic nervous system. And so any exercise where you're slowing the rate of breathing down and you're extending your exhalations is going to calm you down within 3 to 5 minutes. right? And if you're doing it, especially breathing through your nose, so you're using proper mechanics, you're going to do it even more efficiently. So we can, do you want me to lead you through an exercise that is just a simple exercise that I would do as an introduction?
Absolutely. And do you go eyes open or eyes closed?
So we'll get into a formal breathing posture, and I'll give all the cues for that. So if you could put your feet flat on the floor. And then if, in terms of alignment, if you could have your shoulders over your hips, and then your ears over your shoulders. And this alignment is so important because it allows your rib cage to expand laterally. And this allows your diaphragm, which is your primary breathing muscle, to work most efficiently, right? So now you can take your hands like this and put them right here at the bottom of your ribs and then towards the back. Okay. So we're sitting up straight. We have our hands on our ribs. You can close your mouth and breathe through your nose. And then if you want, you can close your eyes, because that's just reducing the amount of information that we're taking in. And I want you, Chris, to take, let's just say 15 seconds and simply bring your attention to the movement of your rib cage, right? Feeling your ribs with your hands. And just imagine breathing into that space between your hands and feeling that lateral movement of your rib cage. And sometimes when people do this, their shoulders are a little tense because it's an awkward position. So just see if you can drop your shoulders and relax them if they're unnecessarily tense. And now that you have a sense of the movement of your rib cage and that your attention is settling a bit on your breathing, I want you to consciously slow your breathing down. And one really useful cue for doing this is to breathe in and out through your nose without making any sound. So you can't hear yourself breathe. The air is coming in so slowly and it's going out so slowly that it makes no sound. And if you want to take it,
that's hard to do with no noise. I didn't think that was possible.
So when you when you said that it's hard, what was hard about it?
Well, you've never really thought about consciously not trying to make a noise when you breathe. So that's the first time I've ever thought about it, and it was a difficult task because you're really concentrating on not trying to make a noise.
Did you feel as you were doing it, did you feel like it was hard to breathe? Like almost like you were at a...
Yeah, for sure.
So that's actually an indication of just a general level of intolerance to carbon dioxide. Because when you slow your breathing down, carbon dioxide then is pooling in your system. It's starting to build up. And that's going to give a sense of breathlessness. Most people don't realize that it's carbon dioxide levels and not oxygen levels that drive the air hunger reflex. So when you're young and you're playing in a pool and you're holding your breath, that anxiety to breathe is not driven by oxygen. It's driven by CO2 levels going up. And so if we had more time, one of the things we could do is a carbon dioxide tolerance test, which involves breathing. And you time how long people can hold their breath after an exhalation, after a normal exhalation. and you time how long it takes for the air hunger reflex to kick in. And that shows the level of stress in someone's physiology. Because if you're chronically stressed out, you're offloading, if you're chronically stressed out, you're breathing faster. And when you're breathing faster, you're offloading more carbon dioxide. So it never has a chance to build up in your system. So when you do a breath hold, it sets off the alarms in your body, the chemoreceptors that measure carbon dioxide in your body. It sets off those alarms and people start feeling anxious. I've worked with athletes who within 5 seconds of holding their breath, they have this sense of anxiety overtake them. I have them repeat the CO2 assessment alone at the end. And if it happens again, I have a conversation about emotional trauma and stress. And every single time with students or with athletes where someone consistently gets below 5, there has always been an emotional trauma or a significant emotional stressor in their life. So one of the things that's so cool about breathing is your breath doesn't lie. You can create all these narratives and stories in your head, but your physiology just tells it like it is. And your breath is expressing your physiology in real time, all the time.
So would the same be said for somebody who might be a little bit overweight? They breathe a little bit faster and more. So does that also increase their stress as well?
Absolutely, because in our heads, we put stress into different boxes. We're like, oh, I have my exercise stress where I go and work out. I have my at work stress. I have my kids stress, right? And so we compartmentalize stress. But your body doesn't. It's all stress to your body. So if you're overweight, that's stressful. If you have asthma, that's stressful. If you got into an argument with someone, that's stressful. If you ran 6 miles this morning, that's stress in the system. So there's only one stress bucket, and that's your physiology. So all of that will affect your CO2 tolerance.
Gotcha. This is great stuff. I really enjoy it. And, I know the listeners are going to definitely get something from it. As we kind of taper it down, I would say that you are, obviously you're an educator and a speaker and an author, but I would say you're an entrepreneur. Is this something new that you're really trying to push, over the last couple of years, or is this something that you always really wanted to do? You've had these ideas in your mind and you've learned so much from, your own research, but other people as well. And you just decided to put it out there. For me, I was always like a very private person. And, when Kobe passed away, it made me realize that you only have, so much time. You never know. And any good ideas or any light that you might be able to help somebody else with, it is your duty to put it out there in the world. And so that's when I, started doing more stuff like this, being more active on LinkedIn and other social media and stuff like that. Before it was all private. I never, really wanted to, I like being in my own kind of bubble. Is this something new for you? Because I really like the stuff that you've put out. In doing my research for this, I've seen some other podcasts that you've been doing. I know you're doing a master class on some really cool things too. So tell me about the entrepreneur in you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I suffered from a lot of anxiety growing up, just debilitating anxiety. I was diagnosed with anxiety disorder and panic disorder. I was told I'd never be able to function without medication when I was like 18 or 19. So much of my journey has been initially was trying to figure out how I could learn to manage my own internal state, right? And once I started encountering tools and realizing that I had that ability to do it skillfully, then as an educator, I thought, like you just said, well, I have to pay it forward now. If I've learned to do these things, I need to share these tools with other people who are suffering from similar things. And so within my own school, I started, I'm the well-being coordinator of my school district. And so I started a mindfulness program 6 years ago. And so I started doing all this work within my school. And I started working with athletic teams at my school, and then word got out. And so suddenly people would reach out and say, hey, can you come to our school district and give a talk? Can you do a workshop with parents? Can you do a workshop with teachers? Hey, this sports team's interested in having you come in and give a breathing seminar. And so suddenly requests started coming in, and I thought, wow, this is obviously something that people really are interested in, and there's a need out there. And so in the last year or two, I've just started kind of more formally creating my platform so that I can stay sane in terms of like the demand, the requests for my work outside of my day job have gotten, which is a good problem to have. It's gotten so much that I can't keep up with it. And so it's forced me to have to try to create a platform where I can start to develop content that doesn't require me to be immediately present. And so the entrepreneur part it's been like, not accidental, but like secondary. It's just been the necessary part of the process to try to spread these ideas and practices with as many people as possible. But it was never something originally that I didn't set out to be an entrepreneur. I set out to understand my own anxiety. And then once I did that, I was like, man, I can really help a lot of these kids in this school. And then it just slowly has rippled out like that.
Right. That's great. I mean, and in your own pain or your own journey, you can always help people along. And, the thing that I like about you is, you're not a absolutist type of person where, what you've studied and things like that, you're super open-minded to other theories and things like that out there. And I'm the same way. Like, if we're talking basketball, there's 15 different ways you can be successful as a basketball coach or a player. In business, there's so many different ways, so many different leadership styles, things like that. And, it's just very nice to meet other people in the same kind of lane, and just I wouldn't say the ability, but just the want to help other people become, better and things like that. But I really enjoyed the last 10 months getting to know people like you. And, when I come to Chicago, I'm definitely looking you up. And when you come to California, you're definitely looking me up. So it's been a true blessing, and really enjoyed getting to know you and our conversations.
Likewise. And to the end of what you were just saying, I don't think there's any more important work as a human being than finding some form of suffering in the world that's meaningful to you, mm-hmm. and that you have the skills to help alleviate. So if anyone is in college or a young adult watching this, and you feel like you don't have purpose or meaning or direction in your life, I think the surest place you can find purpose, meaning, and direction is to understand and identify a form of suffering that is meaningful to you, and look to develop the skills to help alleviate it in some capacity in your neighborhood, in your community, in your school, on your team, and especially first and foremost within yourself. So yeah, and thank you for doing this podcast and having so many interesting people on it, because the world needs more of these conversations about how can we more skillfully take care of ourselves? And again, there's no conversation that's more important, in my opinion.
No doubt. Why don't you tell everybody where they can follow you and follow, all the good stuff that you got going on? There was a bunch of other stuff that I wanted to talk about, your book and stuff like that, but where can everybody take a look and follow your journey?
So I'm on LinkedIn, Matt Dewar, EDD. I use that platform a lot because of professional connections and opportunities, et cetera. But I also have an Instagram that I somewhat keep up with, which is at Dr. Matt Dewar. So feel free to follow that. I think in the coming months, as it gets closer to the release of the workbook, I'm going to start putting out a lot more kind of instructional videos on breathing and some of the things that we talked about. But those are the two best places to find me.
Good deal. Well, thank you very much for joining the program. I know there's a lot of value to be had with the information that you delivered.
Thank you, Chris, for having me. It's been a real awesome conversation.
Thank you for listening to the Beyond the Buckets podcast. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and share the show with your friends. And until next time, take care.